Let's bring in our special guest joining us from San Diego, California, retired crime lab director for the San Diego Police Department, Jennifer Shen. Great to see you, Jennifer. Let's start first with the targeted part of this, and that seems to be the working theory. Nothing taken from the home, no sign of a break-in. So that very well could lead to that conclusion.
Right, and that all comes from the initial evaluation of the scene, which is so important. You go in, you look at the evidence there, you're looking for point of entry, exit, you're looking for a break-in, what was taken, where were the bodies, can you tell where the shooters were within the scene? You know, all of that is put together in sort of a story of the evidence to give them idea what happened. And having done that, they clearly have decided, therefore, that it wasn't a robbery, it wasn't a break-in. And so that would lead them a certain direction when they're doing their investigation.
I mean, it's relatively unusual. You know, a targeted killing, you know, sometimes, you know, there's something going on in their lives that is whether it's a, you know, bad business deal or a drug deal or something. I mean, that's not going on here. I mean, he's 88, she's 80. They're just nice folks living down in Clearwater. That's an unusual part of it, but I guess investigators are going to have to dig into their lives as well, because if it's targeted, if that's your working theory, then you got to figure out why would someone target them.
Exactly. And, you know, these days we are able to dig in very deeply into people's lives with the ability to get to computers, iPhones, tablets, security video, you know, and just really explore if there is something, some deep, dark secret that's going on that would cause them to be someone or a couple that would be targeted. It is very unusual and certainly surprising. So, but you know what? There's a lot of information to be gleaned from this sort of thing, and I'm sure that the investigators have reasons to suspect that they were in fact targeted.
Yeah, there's another case like this that remains unsolved in Georgia involving an elderly couple as well that were killed in a brutal fashion. That one still hasn't been solved either. Another head scratcher. All right, let's talk about the evidence here. 300 pieces of evidence have been evaluated. When you hear a number like that, what does it tell you? What does it mean to you?
Well, what it means to me is that this police department is doing absolutely everything they possibly can to come up with something that will help them. 300 items of evidence from this sort of scene is quite a bit. And it means that they're picking up absolutely anything in the house or in the area that could, in fact, give them something. So it just goes to show how thorough they're being. You know, it's tough. There's, you know, obvious evidence like, you know, the leftover shell casings and, you know, blood pattern and, you know, like I said, looking for fingerprints, shoe prints, entry X's, all that stuff. But you just have to very strategically and carefully go over each and every item, because you just never know what might be the thing that has something on it that might help you solve the case. So it looks like they're doing a really thorough job.
There was a mention of trace DNA. What do they mean when they say trace DNA?
Well, these days we can get DNA profiles off of off of almost anything. Just a very tiny amount of DNA can give us a profile that can lead us to a person. So they mean like touch DNA, something that's just a very small trace. And so there is a lot that can be done with that these days. But even if you get a profile, if it doesn't match to anyone, if it doesn't match to anyone in a database, it's still a dead end for you. And sometimes you just have to wait, and then something happens. Someone's arrested. You get a new suspect that you can compare to that trace DNA, and then all of a sudden you have a huge break in the case.
And when you say in the database is comprised of people who've been arrested or convicted of other crimes?
Yeah, it's also comprised of forensic unknowns. So DNA samples that are collected from crime scenes, so no one knows who they belong to. All of those go in that database as well. So one of the things that happens is if you have an unknown profile from your scene and you enter it into the database, it could hit to other cases, other unknown profiles, and then all of a sudden you can connect several cases. And that sometimes is very useful because you can get a little bit of information from each of the different crime scenes, and then suddenly you have enough to create a picture of your suspect and solve all of the crimes.
So how does that work? So if they have the DNA from the scene here, they'll enter it. But let's say that it's not until, you know, another 2 years that maybe someone's arrested whose DNA would match that. Would that be an automatic hit, or would they have to say, hey, run the trace DNA from that crime scene again, and you got to do it every once in a while. How does that work?
It's a continual process. So once you put the unknown profile in there, it's gonna run against everything that's in there, and then it's going to be run against every new thing that comes in. So every time that there's a hit generated, everyone involved in that case is notified. The investigators are notified, and then they can move forward with looking at that hit and trying to decide what to do with it, if it's investigatively probative or not.
All right, we've got some comments again, and it's posted on social media so folks can share it. Mitch tonight says, just because there is not visible signs of a break-in and there seems to be nothing missing, that does not mean that maybe someone came through an unlocked door. Also, someone could have knocked on the door, and when someone unlocked it, they could have forced their way in. Just because there's not evidence of a forced break-in doesn't mean they knew the killer. Your thoughts about that, Jennifer?
That is a very excellent point. And because the time of death is a pretty broad range, it's about a 24-hour period that covers times during the day where someone might not have their door locked. That's really a good point. And then you're really going to just have to rely on neighbors, people who are in the area who might have seen something, video, looking at everybody's video in the neighborhood to see if they saw anyone coming or going. But you're right. It is certainly an option that someone forced their way in after one of these two victims opened the door and answered the door.
We've got one more comment. This is from Cynthia. I think that someone was about to rob them of something and didn't know they were home. When they noticed they were home, they had to kill them both because they knew who the killer was. But then again, that person who was in there didn't take anything and ends up just committing a double murder. Does that one make sense to you?
Well, I guess it depends on what they were looking for. If they were looking for something specific, a very specific thing that this person was after, and they couldn't find it, I guess that would explain that. I think if they knew their killer, then this still is a targeted crime, targeted for something they either had or targeted for something that they did. So I think that sort of falls in line with what our investigators are thinking.
All right, folks, we'll continue to stay on that story. But when we come back, Jennifer will stay with us. We'll also get a live report from